Good afternoon. If I could ask everyone to take your seats, I don't like to keep you waiting. I thank you all for coming. I thank the weatherman for cooperating. We took a lot of work to get that storm to go more south than we originally projected. And we're going to talk about snow budgets while we're here this afternoon besides. My name is Bruce Rebuffo. I'm the chair of the Board of Selectmen. At the head table here is Ted Alexiadis, who is the town administrator. Next to him is Selectman Irma Lauder, and next to Irma is Selectman Paul Healy. We've been holding these town forums now for about 6 years, and the idea is it gives us an opportunity to share in more detail some information to each of you and gives you an opportunity to ask questions on the particular subjects that we're addressing. We try to have a theme about them, and that makes it more focused than what happens at town meeting when we have to cover so many different warrant articles. So we hope this is your meeting, just as town meeting is your meeting. And our procedures, I'll go through a series of sections this afternoon, and at the end of each section, I'll open it up for questions if there are any. At the end of the formal presentation, if there are other questions you would like to raise on any one of the 47 warrant articles or any one of the other 5,000 things we deal with, we'd be happy to entertain those. So that being said, the three issues I'd like to get on the table this afternoon. One is the Selectmen's financial report. We have a proposal that's forthcoming at town meeting for some tax relief, and I'd like to share with you what that is. But the main issue this afternoon is to deal with an update on the water company acquisition study. That is, there have been a lot of questions on it. There is additional information that we have for your consideration, and I'll be assisted this afternoon by the chairman of that committee, John Asher. As you know, this is the end of my 6 years here, and I'll show you a chart on the next page that deals with the situation that we were faced during the beginning of the recession. We've had a success at raising fund balance, and we've put in place some positions and programs to address those things that are what we call cost destabilizers, things like roads and ice and all those other issues. And then to give you a sense of where we're headed on the future. Ted will handle some of the budget items with me on those questions, but it's important for us that we continue the course that we've been on, because you can have a lot of wishes and a lot of desires and a lot of needs and a lot of wants, but you have to be able to pay for them. And the most important thing is that we can maintain our ability to do that. We have something called fund balance. As you know, municipalities are rated by principally 3 rating agencies: Moody's, Fitch, and Standard & Poor. And if you read some of our earlier reports back in the 2007-2008, while we were successful in the early 2000s getting a AAA rating, the agencies said to us that there are some practices that you need to change. And while you have a good financial base in your operation, the way you're spending and the way you're managing needs to be strengthened. And that is the basis for a AAA rating. Now, we're told, I think, Ted, it was this week, or last week rather, Ted had a meeting with Moody's, and in the Moody's discussion, they used to have 40% of the rating had to do with the financial value of your town, the property values. they're putting less emphasis on that going forward. So that's saying they're paying more attention, as you would all hope, and a fallout from the Detroit issue has been, how well are you managing what we give you? So they want to pay more attention to that. And in the Standard & Poor's evaluation, which we just received 2 weeks ago, which we talked at a selectmen's meeting, they paid particular emphasis to the town management. And they felt that we were good stewards of what we're doing. And as you know, anything that we do that we have to fund, those rating reports are extremely important. With the good assistance of the advisory committee and a financial subgroup that worked on what should be our objective for fund balance, how much money should we have in the bank if an emergency should arise? Now, I would tell you the rating agencies give recognition to the fact that the older states, such as New England, the New England states, they have a little more leeway because our infrastructure is in place for the most part, and we're mostly dealing with replacing it. If we were to live in Phoenix, Arizona, perhaps they'd have a fund balance in excess of 25% that they'd have to maintain in order to keep their AAA rating. We've been advised that a rating between 16 and 20% should be substantial and considered enough to keep our AAA rating. And I'm happy to report to you that we're at 18.07%, just about in the middle of the objective, which is a credit to not just those of us who are in the position, but to all of the employees who have worked so hard to get us there, and to you who keep us our eye on the ball. And as I mentioned, both Fitch last year, Standard & Poor this month, have raised that rating and confirmed our AAA rating. This chart attempts to give you a history, of the general fund balance, and the way it's computed is computed as a percentage of our annual expenditures. So the top of the chart gives you the end of our fiscal year, which, as you know, is June 30th. It tells us the amount of unassigned fund balance that was in the books, the annual expenditures at the time, and that percentage of the balance of that as a percentage. If you can see what started to happen in the early 2000s is the number took a turn in the wrong direction and started to go down. Where we see this reflected, again, is in the AAA rating, the warning we received. And of course, where you see it is in when we fund projects, is the impact would be felt in the percentage that will play in interest. So if you look at 2009, where we were at 8.92%, that number has been something through considerable effort by, as I said, by so many of the department heads and their staffs, coupled with the advisory committees and selectmen. We've been able to move that number to this 18.07% range, which I think is a terrific legacy for all of us. We've had to deal with some structural deficits. Now, I made this chart, Ted made this chart. This was prior to Thursday's forecast of this weekend. But snow and ice has been something that we've had to address, where we unfortunately underfunded those and put procedures in place to make sure that the trend that we used in our forecasting for this number is reflective of more recent conditions. The result of that has been that we have a stronger budget as we go into the year, but of course this year, just as we think we get it down pat, Mother Nature makes sure that she tells us that she remains in charge. I can tell you that in the forecast of some numbers you're going to see, we think the budget could tolerate 1 or 2 more storms. I hope that doesn't happen. My snowblower can't handle it anymore, nor can my back. But it has an impact, obviously, on our expenses. We've done some things on road repairs. A few years ago, we introduced a 5-year road plan. Now, again, I think that intent was that you could see where we were headed in terms of when your road, your streets that serve your neighborhoods, when they would be done. And it was a planned, deliberate effort to make sure that road replacements were something that we should not only have, but you could expect and reasonably see. That involved that we coordinated our efforts with all the people who disrupt our roads because of either work that they have to do or because of repairs. So, for example, we have in place with the gas company, with the water company, with the phone companies, plans that we coordinate the efforts to repair and repave our roads consistent with what their planned needs are. And that takes a lot of effort on the part of our town engineer and our superintendent of the DPW to coordinate that with those other companies. But it has been something that we've been successful at. We've slowed the pace of healthcare cost increases thanks to the efforts of our town administrator and his participation in the Mayflower Group. That has been successful for us, and while healthcare costs, as it remains for all of us a concern, we're on the right expenditure. And capital expenditures are now part of our annual operating budget, and I know that's of interest certainly to all of the departments in how they continue to maintain their viability. So we have plans underfoot to deal more, as I mentioned, on the roads. And thanks to people like Irma Lauder, we're able to get some better focus on the municipal buildings and the structures for them. You'll hear at this town meeting a proposal to deal with this building and how we could strengthen it and make sure that it, like many of our other town structures, would be around for the future. And with that, we have despite all these efforts, a very positive forecast to tell you. Tax relief, but maybe I should follow my own rules. Well, are there any questions on anything that I've said so far? This is like a sermon. That's I want it to be two ways, not one way. So if you have, just stop me. We know. We have a number of projects that have been on our books for some time, and we voted those because they are needed and necessary for the viability of the town. And there's a cost associated with those. But we're also mindful of the situation many of our citizens, many of us, find in the fact that they do need some form of tax relief. So we put forth a concept to mitigate the impact of those increased costs to you. There are two kinds of relief. One, we could do a property tax exemptions or deferrals for those who may be in need, or we could do something else to devote funds to the lowering that tax burden. The idea was to have two groups of beneficiaries. We have always been, and consistently in our history, sensitive to the need of the neediest groups of neighbors. But we also are mindful that some of you also, and some of us also need existing relief. It has been our practice at town meeting to adopt procedures that deal with both kinds of that relief, and therefore we want to deal this year with not only continuing to support those of our neediest in need, but also the proposal we're putting forth is for every residential taxpayer. Now I'm going to ask the town administrator to walk us through this sheet, which tells you the forecast to confirm what I've just said to you. So, Ted, if you would.
Good afternoon. This is a reduced version of the five-year forecast. We've eliminated some of the revenue and expense lines to show you it in a more concise fashion. And it shows that we're going to have a $97 million tax levy for fiscal 2005. I know everyone likes to drop right to the bottom line. We have a town meeting proposed budget, assuming some additional votes between the Board of Selectmen and Advisory Committee, is looking at about essentially balanced at $1,000. But we're also seeing, strong positive numbers in the out years. A couple of things that we've done differently here. We have inflated our capital numbers as we move out, trying to recognize we've held the line on capital for the last several years at about $2 million and below, and now we're realizing that that's going to be difficult to handle on the out years. Additionally, included in your tax levy numbers are the tax relief programs that are going to be coming forth on the next few spreadsheets. Anybody have any questions about the five-year forecast? So, tax relief. The tax relief will be focused primarily on the town's excluded debt. And this is debt that has been excluded from the constraints of Proposition 2.5. A variety of projects over the last decade. The taxpayers have voted in annual elections, allowing the governmental entity to raise property taxes for those annual debt service amounts. This is a schedule or a graph depicting where the tax burden for this, starting in 14, we're right here, and it'll escalate if there's no intervention to about 5.7 million in 2015, and then begin a slow, steady decline throughout the course of paying those projects off. The next chart shows what would happen if we utilize the meals tax revenue on an annual basis. Right now we're projecting $600,000, and that drops the annual tax burden from 5.7 to about 5.1 million for fiscal 15. And the concept, again, and having steady revenues, which is what meals taxes are coming in at very steadily at about 600,000, 620,000 a year, is it allows for a very consistent drop between these lines all the way out. And that's what we strive to do when we try to create tax policy. The goal is to avoid large spikes. So we have a sum of money that we have in pools, and this will be depicted better on the next sheet. This sheet shows the debt exclusions with meals tax revenues for the current year. That would be the difference between the green line and the blue line, and also the reserves. We've been collecting meals taxes since 2011, and we've been saving those. So the question is what to do with those savings, and the way we've applied it here is evenly, actually, I'm sorry, not evenly, in a way so that we can reduce the peak impact of the property taxes, but never see it go back above the lines above it, so that we don't create a spiking effect. What we could do is, with $1.9 million or so that we have in reserves, we could apply it all to this year, and that would have the effect of bringing it down substantially for this year. But then what would happen is, in 16, the rate would go right back up. And in the industry, we consider that poor tax policy because it creates a very uneven structure. What happens when the tax rate spikes like that, your mortgage companies that pay your escrows wind up having an excess or a deficiency, and everybody gets bills asking to increase their escrow accounts, and it creates a little bit of a negative viewpoint. This is our last part of our tax relief proposal. This black line represents an additional $500,000 a year, 400 in fiscal 15 and 500 in every future year, that is further dropping the tax rate down. What this is revenues the town would be legally entitled to raise and therefore spend, but is not. So essentially, the fiscal 15 2015 budget being proposed, and I brought on a couple of sheets back, I showed you that it was a surplus of $1,100. Essentially, we have a $400,000 surplus in fiscal 2015, but instead of spending it, we are turning it into tax relief. And that's what's depicted here in the last schedule. And I think that covers tax relief. Any questions? I know it's a little bit of a confusing subject, and all right, well, not so confusing.
Good, thank you. Thank you, Ted. What we were trying to do, as Ted explained, is smooth it out over the period of time so that you get the benefit in the future for monies that we have today. And by doing it that way, we avoid those spikes that come. But I should also hasten to add, this is a plan, but each year you will have an opportunity to continue to vote on that plan as we go forward. Because if, for example, circumstances should change such that the revenue projections don't come in, or we have an unanticipated expense, or the economy heads south, you take different courses of action when you're in those situations. So that is the benefit of having a long-term plan that allows us to do that. So if there are no questions on that issue, but again, you can come at the end of this, we can open it up again for that purpose. We're going to get into something that you know we've been dealing with since 2012. And thanks to the leadership of John Asher, assisted by Ed Siegfried and Josh Krumholtz and Joe Beerworth and Michael Salerno, we've been able to put together a group, and you're going to see some of the fruits of that effort and some of the numbers that they have put together. As I was thinking about this and the complications that some of the terminology may have for some of us, I thought I dusted off the old economics textbook. And there is no chart on this, but I would hope everybody knows the difference between debt and equity. So forgive me, I'll go back to my professorial training and tell you, equity is when you take money out of your pocket and go buy something. Debt is when you take money out of somebody else's pocket and go buy something. The difference is that in either case, you're paying for it. And the issue that we want to be sure you understand is, as we go through the analysis of the work that the team has done on in evaluating the water company value to us if we decided to purchase it, you would see and understand what the impact would be. Now, I hasten to add and remind you, and John will say this as well, our proposal has been to go at this to look at three areas: governance, finance, and engineering, to look for in that analysis any showstoppers. And the showstoppers would be those things that would say to us, this isn't a good idea for Hingham to own its own water company. I'm here to report to tell you that we have not seen those showstoppers, and John will go through the details as to how that committee has worked to identify that there are no such animals in the room. So I hope you pay attention to this. I think it's good work, and I'm sure you'll find it of interest. So with that, I'd like to introduce John Asher, who will walk you through this section. John? Okay.
Thank you, Bruce, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Asher, and as Bruce said, I'm joined by two of my colleagues on the Water Company Acquisition Study Committee, Ed Siegfried, who was in charge of the financial analysis phase of the study, and Josh Krumholtz, who is the secretary of the committee. What I'm going to do this afternoon with Ed as well is basically report not so much on the committee's work, but on what has occurred from a town perspective since last year. Since the committee basically, in last June, accomplished the major function that it was chartered to do, which was to make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, which it did. However, the committee still exists and is still performing work at the request of the Board of Selectmen as the complaint goes forward. So, just as most of you will recall, in Town Meeting 2012, the Board of Selectmen sponsored an article to study the feasibility and advisability of the town acquiring its water company. And for that reason, the Water Company Acquisition Study Committee was chartered. Originally, the recommended motion before Town Meeting 2012 was for $500,000. That amount was subsequently amended from the floor to $320,000 because the Board of Selectmen at the time believed and hoped that litigation would not be likely. That has not proven to be the case. However, the Water Company Study Committee had its first meeting in May of 2012, and at that meeting it adopted a set of principles of operation, an important element of which was that the committee would conduct its work in an open, transparent manner and with no predisposition to any particular outcome. In other words, it would follow the data. And that is the spirit within which it has conducted its work for now almost 2 years. From May of 2012 through November of that year, the committee, as Bruce said, had 3 phases: financial analysis, engineering, and governance that it was going to examine, but spent most of that time frame looking at financial analysis, and in particular, the costs associated with municipal ownership of the water company rather than private ownership. At about the latter part of October, November, the financial analysis really began to examine purchase price as what it would cost the town in accord with the 1879 statute that formed the water company to acquire it. But although we focused mostly on financial analysis, we still did look-aheads in the engineering and governance arenas to ensure, as Bruce said, that there weren't any showstoppers, basically insurmountable aspects of acquisition or potential acquisition that would really warrant the cessation of the study. And we did not find any through our analysis through June of last year. And having identified no showstoppers, and after careful consideration of the risks and, say, rewards associated with continuing the study, the committee voted unanimously on June 25th to recommend to the Board of Selectmen that it take the steps necessary to begin a potential acquisition. And I want to emphasize potential. We're just proceeding, always looking for showstoppers. Not having found any, it ultimately would be the decision of town meeting, if the Board of Selectmen brought it before town meeting, for acquisition. So we're proceeding very cautiously and stepwise. 2 evenings later, the Board of Selectmen voted unanimously to accept that recommendation, and subsequently, in late June, Bruce, as the liaison, the Selectman liaison to the committee, contacted the Aquarian president by phone to see if Aquarian was willing to negotiate a purchase price in light of the study committee's and the Board of Selectmen's unanimous votes the preceding week. That contact has yet to be reciprocated. So, let me talk a little bit about the complaint. The complaint is really an effort to have the court, in the absence of an agreement to negotiate a price, to have the court decide what the price ought to be. The dispute really addresses 2 aspects in terms of what our filing was on July 3rd of last year. And that dispute, that complaint, is now being heard within the Suffolk County Superior Court business litigation session, a session that's constructed precisely to address complex business issues of this sort. So there are 2 aspects to the dispute. First, purchase price. Those of you that remember the presentation back in July of 2012, Aquarion's attorney presented to the town the results of a valuation study performed by Willamette Management Associates that basically said for the town to acquire the complete property, corporate property, and intangible property of the water company, it would cost $184.5 million. The financial analysis that you'll hear Ed walk through in more detail, both from an operating cost as well as a purchase price perspective, basically, with the assistance of a water utility expert, came out and said, as we included in the complaint filing, that the appropriate price should be in the range of $56 to $60 million. While Aquarion has consistently maintained that it is not for sale, in its recent court filings, it has acknowledged that the town does have the right to purchase the Aquarion Water Company. However, it disputes the price. However, the second aspect of our complaint, which is does the town acquire the water treatment plant when it acquires the water company, Aquarion at this point has said that it can neither agree nor disagree at this time in terms of the town's right to acquire the water treatment plant. On October of last year, the court held the business litigation session, held its first hearing with the parties in attendance. The good news is that our special counsel representing the town was successful in presenting to the judge a fairly aggressive schedule associated with the prosecution of the case in terms of depositions, discovery, and basically the production of expert reports. That is good from a town perspective because it would hopefully shorten the time frame associated with the suit, which means it costs less money for the town. The downside of it is that basically it caused the town to have to accelerate the expenditure of funds that would have taken us through this town meeting because we had to, earlier than anticipated, bring to bear expert financial valuation expertise that we hadn't planned on bringing to bear until after this coming town meeting. For that reason, we have put forward before the Advisory Committee and the Board of Selectmen a reserve fund transfer request in the amount of $150,000 to cover the cost of that expert financial valuation expertise that is now being executed, and you'll see the results of shortly. The good news is that the warrant article that will be presented to town meeting this April will be decremented by that same amount. So Ed is going to walk through in a little bit more detail the results of the financial analysis. All I'm going to say is we looked for showstoppers. We didn't see them. From a purchase price perspective, the financial valuation firm that we retained, Duff & Phelps, a nationally recognized firm, we wanted to be sure, Ed and I particularly wanted to be sure that we had independent validation of the purchase price before we went back to the town and requested any more funding. And so we did something that was highly unusual. Having retained Duff & Phelps in December, after interviewing a number of qualified candidates, we asked if they could perform a fast path preview, if you will, of the purchase price as they saw it within the context of the 1879 statute that formed the water company. And would they do that in a very timely fashion, since we had decisions to make about a reserve fund transfer and whether or not there should even be a warrant article presented for town meeting consideration in April. Duff & Phelps did give us that review in very early January and basically got back and said that in their view, in light of the 1879 statute, the water company and of all of its property and intangibles should probably cost not less than $40 million, but certainly shouldn't cost more than $70 million. With that analysis, we did not see a showstopper. In other words, we had completely independent validation of the work that we'd done as town volunteers, that we'd seen as a result of our water utility expert. So really 3 cuts that all kept coming out in the same place, not a showstopper financially. However, we were also mindful, and Duff and Phelps was quick to let us know that that work was going to continue because their expert reports, in accordance with the business litigation scheduling order, really aren't due until April 15th. So what we were seeing was the result of a work in progress, and that will be further refined between now and when their expert report is finalized. Again, we were looking for showstoppers, so we looked further at engineering, having had one discussion with an outsourcing firm, and the committee, early in its discussions of engineering, determined that probably the most advisable course of action for the town, should town meeting decide ultimately to acquire the water company, should avail itself of an outside firm with nationally known, with best practices that could hit the ground running, in order to have that firm actually operate the water company on behalf of the town. In other words, to outsource operations. It so happens that the Cohasset Water Department outsources its operation to a firm with which they're pleased, Woodard & Curran. And so, as I remarked last year, we had a meeting with Woodard & Curran. We had a second meeting with Woodard & Curran this past June, where we walked through their letter estimate to the town in great detail and came away from that discussion believing that it was a sound proposition, that outsourcing would be a very viable approach to operating the water company, and it would fit within the cost model that had been prepared by Ed during his financial analysis. In other words, their costs would be at or lower than what we built in terms of operating the water company. We've also talked with several engineering firms in terms of capital improvement to the system. And that's important because it's one thing to run it, it's another to repair it and to hopefully improve an aging infrastructure. There are a number of firms that are interested in that if the town decided to proceed further. And the committee's approach, certainly mine and Ed's, was that it would be good to have 2 different vendors doing the work of operations and capital improvement, just to make sure that there was a check and balance in place, but also that the town wasn't becoming a captive client to one vendor. So we've looked at engineering, and finally we've taken another pass at governance. After the town filed its complaint on July 3rd of last year, Town of Hull filed an amicus brief in support of the town's complaint. We've had multiple meetings with officials, the towns of Hull and Cohasset, and in fact there is a draft intermunicipal agreement being prepared that would serve to take the discussion to a lower level, just to make sure that at a detail level it still sounds attractive to all the parties, again, should the town decide to acquire the water company. To net it out, we continue not to see any showstoppers in either the financial analysis, engineering, or governance arenas. And for that reason, we have proceeded with the reserve fund transfer and with the preparation of an article for funding the complaint from this town meeting until next. But one thing is important to recognize. If you go back to town meeting 2012, why did this effort begin in the first place? It had to do with the fact that there were frequent service disruptions due to water main breaks and relatively slow response in terms of repair. And that, in combination with water rates, which were the 5th highest in the Commonwealth at the time, was, I think they were the primary stimuli for Article 19, which town meeting passed in town meeting 2012. What this chart shows is another consequence of what I will call continued underinvestment in the capital improvement of the system. That is to say, unaccounted for water. It's a busy chart, so I'm going to take a little bit of time with it. But first, what I will do is define unaccounted for water. It's a common measure in the water utility business, and basically is water for which ratepayers pay, but they don't receive. As you can see, looking at the chart, from 2007 forward, the period of time for which Macquarie has owned the water company, when it purchased it from Kelda, the unaccounted for water has exceeded 15%. And in fact, the last 2 years, 2011, 2012, has exceeded 20%. The Department of Environmental Protection's goal for water companies is that unaccounted for water be not more than 10%. Those percentages have stayed consistently high, and basically, if you look at it, if you look at 2012 in particular, fully 1/5 of the water treated is unaccounted for. That means of the 1.2 billion gallons that were produced by Aquarian in 2012, over 253 million gallons are unaccounted for. In other words, slightly less than 1/2 of Accord Pond's capacity is unaccounted for every year. Elimination or even significant reduction of that unaccounted for water would reduce costs to the ratepayers, because we're paying for it, and would also, in effect, increase the water supply by using water more efficiently. So with that background, I'll now ask Ed Siegfried to describe the study financial analysis in greater detail.
Good afternoon. My name is Ed Siegfried, and I'm a member of the Water Company Acquisition Study Committee. My assignment is to share with you the work that has been done to date in determining the financial impact of a town-owned water company and to examine the financial feasibility of a potential acquisition. Our work is not complete. There is more that needs to be done. As you have heard previously, the final acquisition price has not been determined yet, and that price has a significant impact on the numbers and the financial feasibility. However, we can share with you the financial impact based on the work we've done thus far, assuming a range of acquisition prices. Before we go to the next slide, I'd like to give you a brief summary of the financial work we did. The objective set out by the committee was to build a detailed financial model comparing the cost of continued Aquarian ownership and operation of the water company versus town ownership and operation by year over a number of years. First, in order to determine the financial impact of a town-owned water company, we needed to have a thorough understanding of Aquarian's cost structure. We started this effort about 18 months ago and have spent many hours gaining an understanding of the water company's current and projected costs in order to build our financial model. In doing this, we used publicly available Aquarian reports filed with and produced by the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities. We used information requested from and supplied by Aquarian itself. We used information provided by Aquarian's consultants in their reports provided to the town. And finally, we held a series of 3 financial meetings that John referred to with senior representatives of Aquarian in September and October 2012. Representing Aquarian at the meetings were John Walsh, Vice President, and Troy Dixon, Aquarion's Director of Rates and Regulations. Ted Alexiadis, our town administrator, joined me in those meetings. The purpose of the meetings was not to attempt to resolve the issue of the water company purchase price. Rather, the sole objective of the meetings was to get a better understanding of where our respective financial models differed in terms of current and projected costs. We were successful in the reconciliation of our numbers. Aquarion also provided us with their own projection of costs and rate increases by year out to 2022. The meetings were very productive. Following the review of all of the data in the reports that I mentioned previously, in our meetings with Aquarion, I went back to our financial forecast model and made some revisions and several fine-tuning adjustments. I also reviewed the financial model with several very talented financial professionals, including some with water company and public utility expertise. Without exception, all seem satisfied with our town model. So essentially, what we have now is a financial forecast model in line item detail by year from 2015 to 2035, a 21-year period. The model calculates and compares the cost of Aquarion's ownership by year over that 21-year period with the cost of town ownership. Now, John, if you'd go to the next slide. Let me pause just a moment. Yeah, this one right here. Just pause a moment. Let me explain what you're looking at. What you see in the top line of numbers is that the cost difference, or cost elimination total, for the 21-year period, 2015 to 2035, under town ownership versus Aquarion ownership, is quite significant. At two different acquisition prices, $40 million and $70 million, the range that John spoke about earlier. The cost elimination over 21 years, $80.8 million at the $40 million purchase price level, $41.4 million at the $70 million level. The cost difference varies depending on the purchase price, obviously, of the water company. I now want to take a few minutes and explain the cost elimination numbers and how we arrived at the difference between the cost of running a town-owned water company compared with Aquarion's costs, which are passed on through the water charges that we all pay. First, the Department of Public Utilities approved charges for Aquarion water delivery in Hingham, Hull, and Cohasset are currently approximately $12 million in total annually. This is what we are charged for water. These charges are based on both the costs incurred by Aquarion in operating a water system, plus a profit to Aquarion. Of that $12 million, approximately $4 million relates to charges for the water treatment plant, which is located, as you know, off of Main Street near the Lutheran Church. And $8 million relates to the charges for the water distribution system, or the cost of getting the water to our homes, schools, and businesses in Hingham, Hull, and a small portion of Cohasset through the pipes in the ground. Based on the work we have done over the past 18 months, we have identified approximately $6.7 million in current Aquarion annual charges that would be eliminated if the town were to own and operate the water company. That is $6.7 million out of the total charges of $12 million, or about 56%. The $6.7 million in eliminated charges include the water treatment plant lease expense of $2.7 million, of which $1.7 million is debt service, and the percent rent factor, which is an overcharge based upon the excess every month above 30 million gallons of water that flows through the water treatment plant. That in itself is about $1 million a year. The return on the rate base, $1.6 million. That's essentially the Aquarian profit number that's included in the $12 million. That goes away. Aquarian pays federal and Massachusetts income taxes, which total about $600,000, included in the $12 million. A municipally owned, a town-owned water company would not pay federal or state income taxes. Depreciation, $850,000. I won't go into detail, but the town doesn't incur that depreciation charge of $850,000. Plus the elimination of other expenses, including things like rate case expenses, corporate overhead charges, shared office space, the town of Oxford's legal fees, we pay a portion of those, customer satisfaction surveys, rent expense for facilities in other towns, water purchase for resale. All these other items add up to another $1 million a year in eliminated costs. This brings the total costs, which could be eliminated, to the $6.7 million annually. That's the cost elimination number. That's how we get to those numbers out over 21 years. In our current financial model, assuming town ownership, these eliminated charges would be used to, 1, fund the purchase price of the water company, plus $3 million of initial upfront accelerated capital improvements to the system, which would address in part the 21% in unaccounted for water loss that John Asher spoke about previously on the previous slide that you saw there. All of this would be paid for through 20-year borrowing and recovered through the water bills, not through the tax levy. Number 2, it would be used to fund $2 million annually in capital for the system improvements and maintenance for the next 21 years. Plus, it would be used to repay to the town all of the expenses incurred in funding the current legal action. Finally, it would be used to add back approximately $200,000 annually in some new municipal costs, primarily administrative costs for a billing system and some office costs. After funding all of this at the acquisition prices you see on the chart, there would still remain a cost elimination difference between town ownership and continued Aquarian ownership ranging between $80.8 million at a $40 million purchase price and a $41.4 million elimination at a $70 million purchase price over the 21-year period 2015 to 2035, or an average annual total of $3.8 million at the $40 million price and $2 million at the $70 million price. As John Asher said earlier, the town currently believes the ultimate purchase price should be in the range of $40 to $70 million. As indicated on the chart, the cost difference would be available for additional water system improvements beyond the additional $3 million that I referred to earlier and the $2 million annually thereafter, and/or water rate adjustments. And the next chart, which is a display of this cost differential, let me explain what you're seeing here. I don't have the little green button, but that's okay. The red line, starting with the $12 million, there you go, thank you, John. The $12 million on the left is what our water rates add up to today, with the cost growing out through 2035 if Aquarian continued to own the water system. Again, through 2022, those are the numbers that were given to us. And what we've done is just continued that trend line, extrapolated it out, using essentially the same cost structure out through 2035 when the current lease for the water treatment plant expires. The middle line is what the cost differential would be, or what the costs would be at the $70 million purchase level, and the bottom line, what the cost would be at the $40 million purchase level. The difference being, of course, between, say, the bottom two lines is the purchase price, the amortization of the additional debt of $30 million, a difference between a $40 million price and a $70 million price. So you have to think of what is the cost elimination that I've talked about. It's that $6.7 million in specific items we've identified, but it's represented by the spread between those lines. It's the spread between the top line and the second line. That's the 6.7. So rates are going to grow. I mean, it's not going to be that you're going to save, your water bill is not necessarily going to go down, but it's going to grow, but at a less rapid and less high rate, if you will, going in the future. So that's what the cost elimination is. Okay? So with that, I'm going to turn it back to John.
Oops, want this here too?
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Okay, so what are the near-term next steps? In other words, between now and town meeting. Most importantly, on March 25th is the second conference in the business litigation session to evaluate progress against the court's scheduling order, which was issued the day after the first conference, which was October 22nd. So on the 23rd, a scheduling order was issued by the court. March 25th, the parties will meet with the judge, and she will evaluate progress in terms of the milestones she established. That's very important because at that time, the judge may, no guarantees, may actually fix a date for trial. That's important to us because in terms of the warrant article that is being prepared for town meeting consideration in April, we want to know what the judge is going to say on the 25th. So we will finalize that article and the funding estimate that will be part of it following that conference on the 25th. Obviously, town meeting is on the 28th, but between then and the 25th, we will not only, we've disclosed our expert witnesses in terms of the firm, Duff & Phelps, today. We will disclose who they are exactly on April 15th or thereabouts, and they will produce their expert reports on which they are working and that I referenced earlier. On May 15th, current schedule in place, Aquarian will disclose its expert witnesses, and a month and a half later will produce its expert reports. And finally, with the existing scheduling order from the court, we believe that the trial would be scheduled for some date not before September, unless, of course, Aquarian indicates a willingness to reciprocate the offer that was extended by Bruce Rebuffo back in June of last year. And so we continue to believe that the option C, the option of a negotiated settlement, is still a possibility. Finally, I would add just a couple of remarks before I wrap up. A warrant article to consider the actual purchase of the water company would only be brought forward to a future town meeting if a reasonable purchase price were to result either from adjudication or negotiation. And I'll repeat what I know I said last year, and which you can see in the report to annual town meeting last year. A reasonable price really has three components. First, that it would be rate transparent. In other words, acquisition of the water company in and of itself would not cause water payer rates to increase. Secondly, that as you heard Ed Siegfried describe, it would enable the formation of a capital reserve that would allow accelerated improvement of an aging system. And finally, it would allow the repayment to fund balance of all the funds expended to get us to that point, starting with the $320,000 authorized for Article 19. Seeing no showstoppers so far, the data suggests that continuation of the study and the complaint are both advisable and feasible. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, John. Ed, I'd now like to open the floor for discussion or questions. Excuse me. Can we get a mic to you so we can hear you? Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Stathopoulos, 17 Volusia Road. As you're aware, I attended a meeting. I try to attend many meetings, but everyone was in executive session for the last 2 years. The only meeting that was open was the June 27th meeting. At that one, I requested information for which it was stated that it was not available due to advice of legal counsel, etc. The first concern was that this was all done in secrecy, but the things that I wanted and I requested back then that were not available were any pro forma worksheets, cash flow analyses, of which some of them were given here, a break-even analysis. What happens if it's $72 million? Is that a showstopper? I mean, it just, and when will Cohasset and Hall start kicking in for these costs? Why should we be bearing all this cost when we have two other towns that, quote unquote, would profit from this? But, you know, it's going forward, and there's other questions. One is, Aquarians has to report to the DPU for any rate increases. If it's run by the town, we do not have to go in front of the DPU for rate increases. The other thing was, I appreciate all the work and the figures, but Camp Dresser McKee did a study in 2009 and said there would be about a 41 to 50% increase in the rates for it. So there's a difference there, but I'm more concerned of all the detail that should be forthcoming, and I'm very upset that everything was executive session based on counsel, etc. And I just feel that this major thing should not go in front of town meeting, probably with something that's a handout that this would take, and I mentioned this June 27th, that we should have something well in advance to study and the facts and figures, not something that's going to be a handout there. And again, I'm going to emphasize my biggest thing is the lack of any information for 2 years.
Is that everything? I'm sure you do. Let me get to the issue of executive session. And I'm going to give counsel an opportunity. Josh, would you like to? This is Josh Krumholtz, not counsel to the town, a member of the committee.
Good afternoon. Josh Krumholtz. I'm a member of the Acquisition Committee, and I am not special counsel for the town. We do have special counsel for the town that is handling the litigation, but I do have a legal background. I'm a trial lawyer, so I'm sure that's one of the reasons that I was asked to sit on the committee. Your frustration is appropriate. It's a frustration that we share. The challenge is this. The default is to be as transparent as possible, and we would like to be able to share all our thought processes. The problem is we're in litigation. All the thought processes that we share, that we've developed in combination with special counsel. They all have a very much a legal framework in which we're operating. And the more information that we share publicly, the more information is given to the other side, who are anxiously scribbling, waiting to hear if I'm going to say something right now, that they can turn back to their lawyers, use with their experts to gain an advantage. So we have to, a lot of times, default when we're having these discussions, when it really is more on the purchase price side. You know, the cost analysis, how much it'll cost to run the plant. You heard Ed give a lot of detail on that. That has nothing to do with the litigation itself. That has to do with whether we want to buy the company once we get price X. But coming up with what price X is, we have a statute from 1879 that's basically 2 run-on sentences. It's very ambiguous. There's a lot of judgment that's involved in trying to figure out what we think the purchase price is going to be so we can make the recommendation to the Board of Selectmen. So what we've tried to do is, and this timing is not coincident that you saw up on the board, which is we're hoping that we're going to be in a position by town meeting, in advance of town meeting, to have our expert already have done his analysis, and we'll be in a position to be giving it to the other side. So once that's done, the cat is out of the bag, as it were. We've met our obligation of disclosure, and at that point, at town meeting, and as far in advance of town meeting as we can, to give a lot more detail as to what we think the number is going to be. So part of it is patience, and I completely understand the frustration. I was on the advisory committee some years ago before this, and transparency is the most important attribute of what we do, and everybody agrees with that. It's just we also have to do what's in the best interest of the town ultimately, and we'll get there. Okay?
That was just one moment. You had some other points, and thank you, Josh, for that. The report that we expect to give to you will be in sufficient detail. I think there are, I'll say 15 or 16 different proposed variations in the analysis of the price. You want cash flow analysis, you'll get all that. You'll get the interest rates and the flexibility on those, and all of that will be in the analysis when we get it. But there are people from Aquarian in the room here as we speak, and on the advice of council, we gave you what we can today. We are willing, certainly willing, and will give you more information so that you're right. Your frustration can be eliminated, and you can use your expert opinion to evaluate the judgment. This is a committee. The town decides. We don't decide. As we say, we have worked on the premise that it's a showstopper. Now, to your question about Hull and Cohasset. The issue that we brought forth was a Hingham issue. We kept them informed. Hull, each of those towns had we said, if you want to engage in the discussion, I think I used the expression, there were people here when I had that discussion, I said, give me a check. Otherwise, we're running this operation. However, we have kept them informed. As recently as Thursday night, I met with both towns to give them an update. They saw this presentation Thursday night because we knew you were going to see it, and I didn't want them to be blindsided by it. So we have done that to keep them involved. They will pay us if we are successful. Their customers will reimburse the town of Hingham through the water rates to pay us for the money we've spent. And and they understand that, and they agree it. As John mentioned, there's an intermunicipal agreement that's in draft form. I can't comment on it yet because they haven't seen it too, but we've had high-level discussions as to how we think this is all going to work. That hasn't been discussed yet. There's also hasn't been discussed is what's the voting arrangement? How is this all going to work? What we have discussed is that common infrastructure, that is the water treatment plant, for example, and improvements to that would be equally shared in the rates, in the payments. Individual town expenses, road repairs or pipe repairs would be paid by the ratepayers in that town, and they agree with that concept. So we'd have two separate reimbursement positions. So that is the thinking, but the details are in the making, and until we get the price, we're not in a position to finalize that. You had some other points, but there were other questions, and I'd like to give that an opportunity for the other questions to be heard. Jim?
Is the only option, I guess, a single town?
I can't hear. Jim, can you use the microphone? It's right there. Yeah, thank you. There you go. Yeah. Eileen does push buttons, yeah, okay.
The only option, a single town acquisition with payment schemes, or is there any thought about
I'm sorry, say that, I couldn't hear you quite. 3 towns owning it? That's all of that is who owns the water company. Where Hingham is going forward, the statute governs the town of Hingham, and that's the option under which we're behaving. It doesn't doesn't cover. Am I saying that right, Josh? Yes. We're the only one. The other two towns don't have any rights. Only we have the right. Okay. Yes. You go. Here. Thank you.
Ready to go? The model information, the nice charts that I saw indicate to me that the committee would probably recommend that we go forward with the acquisition if the cost is around 70 million or less. Now, we've never been in the water company business before. So when I look at this, I think there should be a big uncertainty factor in your modeling. And I don't see that. I don't see error bars. Maybe you've thought about this, but if you're anywhere within 20% or so of break even, perhaps you ought to think about the potential for things that might come up that we don't know about because we haven't been in this business before.
Okay. Thank you, Hugo. Let me get to the question of not being in the business. A lot of other towns aren't in the electric business, but we are. There are 351 communities in the Commonwealth, and I believe the number is 11 have their water run by private companies. So 340 communities run their own water. I don't think that means that it's a good idea or a bad idea. That's for them to decide. But the committee, when it came out, very quickly said that's why they wanted to go to an outsourcing firm to say we would supervise that process, and that we would hire experts. And there are companies that do this for that purpose. In fact, Hull has they do their assessing and one other function that we do internally, but they put that outside. So that's a question that we could address. And then the last issue gets at the question that was raised earlier, and that is we have had, the reason this has taken so long is I can assure you we have heard from many of you on these very same issues. And we have thought long and hard about this. And while we are leaning to say this appears to be a good deal for us to own it, that's not for us to decide, that's for you to decide. And that has to happen by a 2/3 vote. All I can tell you is you heard from Ed some of the numbers that we're paying to Macquarie, an Australian bank, to run our water company. We're paying that profit. I think, Ed, the number is 1.6 million out of 12. That comes to you. Goes back to you, the ratepayer. It doesn't come to the town coffers. It stays as a separate entity. So, John, if you'd like to.
I think it's a good question asking about is there a buffer, is there some allowance for uncertainty? And in fact, there is. I think we've been extremely conservative. Ed actually doesn't just wear a belt, he wears belt and suspenders and occasionally another pair of suspenders. Anybody that's worked with him knows very conservative. But seriously, when we talked with Woodard and Kern, one possible firm to whom we would outsource operations should the town decide to acquire the water company, they actually produced a price for operations which was significantly lower than what we had put in the model, first of all. We did not include that in the savings that you saw Ed present. Secondly, as Ed represented, we assumed the Aquarion's rate of rate increase to be very modest, less actually than if you would look at their rate of rate increase since Macquarie has owned Aquarian. The Aquarian company was formed by Kelda in 2001, but the rate increases that we've heard, double-digit rate increases since 2007, are really under Macquarie's ownership. Nevertheless, in the model, we've baked in very modest increases on the part of Aquarian. Finally, in terms of the cost associated with running the water company, we've baked into annually the cost associated with it, 3% increase year after year after year. So pretty aggressive growth in terms of cost. And again, to your point, a fairly significant buffer when you add those pieces in terms of what it will actually cost to run the water company through what the committee would still recommend, an outsourcing firm with national reputation, ability to check their bona fides, they're close to us, and that could bring best practices to bear as well.
So we talked about this, but I just want to make sure we're all clear on the framework. So, we're in a legal process. That legal process will probably resolve itself sometime in 2015, at least from a decision from the court. At that point, the court is presumably going to give a number, right? At that point, I'm sure we're going to have to update everything. Right? We're not going to know what our borrowing, costs are going to be a year from now as to what they are now. If it's 72 million, I think I could speak for the committee that if we're at 40 to 70 million, it's a relative no-brainer in terms of what we're going to recommend. If it's 72 million, that's not that far off of 70. If it's 80 million, if it's 90 million, I don't know. I mean, we have to kind of see where we are at that point in terms of what the recommendation is going to be. Really, the decision point being made now is the decision of whether to incur additional expenses going forward so we can get to that more fundamental decision point down the road.
Thank you for that, Josh. Just one other point I'd like to add. I know there's some discussion about interest rates. Aquarian refinanced, the interest that they're paying for the water treatment plant. You know what a AAA rated town, that's why we put this up at the beginning. A AAA rated town, we pay about half, we pay about 3%, they're paying about 7.6, I think. So we're paying about half that they pass. So there's flexibility in that. And we did put an escalator into the analysis as what would happen with interest rates if they went up. How much flexibility we have. And that's in the analysis that we've done. And that's a significant number to give us some wiggle room. So that I don't know what the break-even point is. I don't know what the price, it depends on what the price is. But there is wiggle room in this analysis to say we're giving you the best at this point in time. Is there a showstopper? If Aquarian got their 184 million, God bless them, I'd like to be part of that because of the profit they're going to make on that. But we're not going to buy it at 184, that's for sure. Okay, there was another question. Sure. The annual revenue? It's 12 million. I think Ed mentioned that the revenue is 12 million for service area A. That's all three towns. And I think, what's the percentage we are of the three, Ed?
All of Massachusetts Aquarium is about 16 million, and it's divided into service area A.
Okay.
Service area A, which is Hingham, Castle, is 12 million.
Okay. Yeah, so let me repeat that. We're about two-thirds of service area A. Service area...
We're about two-thirds of A and B.
Oh, I'm sorry. Two-thirds of A and B combined. We're service area A. Oxford and Middleborough are service area B. The total revenue for Aquarian in Massachusetts is 16 million, and we're 12 million in service area A. Yeah, Edna. Yeah.
Bruce, will there be an opportunity, I'd like to make an informed decision, will there be an opportunity where both sides of this issue will be fully aired so everyone can hear both sides? Because, there's always a second side to
Yes, you're
whatever
absolutely
decision
right.
should be made. And when will that take place? And will it be public so everyone will be able to see what the details are?
Sure. No, absolutely.
Do we know when it will be? No?
No, we're waiting, to be very frank, we're waiting for the judge's order on the 25th, and I think sometime thereafter we would expect to have a public
Will it be
hearing.
before town meeting?
Yes.
With sufficient time for
Yes.
us to,
Yes.
learn about it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you. My concern goes back to the three-town ownership of the company. Really, the concern is we are already in the summertime using 3.5 million gallons per day. The water, I think unless we're all invested in the same source of water, which is the Ware River aquifer, there's not going to be the same kind of commitment for conservation. This is a real concern for the town of Hingham in the next 10 to 15 years. We're already at the DPW's rate for the summer months. We do not have an infinite water supply.
No, we
I
don't.
don't hear that in the discussion.
Well, I'll let John come up and answer. I think that chart you saw is part of our water supply issue is the unaccounted for water that we're losing. That is one issue, but I'll let John talk to the other portion.
Well, that was the point I was going to make. In terms of water volume, actually, year to year, 2011 to 2012, water usage declined slightly, but it still doesn't take away from the point you're making about the stressed water basin. And I think the best answer I could give would be to address proactively and aggressively the repair of the infrastructure and reduce unaccounted for water. Even half, as you could see from that chart, would save a lot of water that we're paying for right now. So it would address both rates as well as conservation and water usage.
And one last point is whether we own it or Aquarian owns it, that same conservation effort still has, you make a good point, that has to be. So that is a reason we have to work on that. Ted? Yes, if that's your point, there's two questions here. One is Hingham has the statute, Hingham has the right, Hull and Cohasset don't. But they're their citizens that we have to have involved in the management of this. And if part of the intermunicipal agreement, I would address the question of conservation, because as you rightly point out, it's not unlimited. And I know that's a concern to many people about the future growth of the town. So that's why that is another issue that would have to be addressed in that agreement. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Carol.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Sure.
Carol Meyer of the Hingham Journal. I'm just wondering if the town thinks that they can be more successful than Aquarian at finding the unaccounted for water, because I've done a story before, I don't remember all the details, but I know that they're making a lot of efforts. So I'm just wondering if the town thinks that they could do a better job at that, and if they think so, how?
Sure. A good question. We believe that let's turn the clock back to 2012 when this issue started, and you remember a man by the name of Harry Hibbard, and when he committed to us that he was going to put more money into the infrastructure. Let me give you the 2012 number. They promised us that they were going to put $1.4 million into the infrastructure. Do you know what they put in? $900,000. That's after they made a public commitment and a private commitment to me that they would do that. So that's one issue. We don't think they keep their commitments. You saw in our plan here that we're going to increase the amount of capital funding to make up for those past issues, and there's that's in the long-term plan to conclude to do that. And the third thing, I'm going to give you something else to think about. When you talk to our town engineer about opening roads to repair the pipes, this is a long-term problem. Can you imagine if we're open on, if we open as many roads as we think have to be open to repair all this at the same time? That's not going to happen. That's going to have to be a carefully thought out plan under our management. I think it's easier for us to do that if it's under our control than it is if I have to negotiate a capital improvement plan with an outside company. That's my opinion. Pardon me? Oh, go ahead. Tell me what I didn't answer.
How does that? I'm just not clear on how that answers my question.
The unaccounted for water?
Because you said something about opening the roads.
Yeah, let me unaccounted for water. One of it comes from broken pipes. You have to repair the pipes, obviously, to prevent the leaks. Our belief is that if we have a long-term plan to fix the pipes, that would make sure that it happens. And when it's under your control, it will happen. All right, John, if you...
If you look at Aquarion's capital expenditures over the last several years and correlate that to water main breaks, emergency water repairs, what you see is they track exactly. In other words, basically the higher, quote, capital expenditure is really just repair for something that's broken. It's not proactively getting in front of the problem and beginning to improve the infrastructure. What you've seen in the financials that Ed presented is a structure and a plan that would say we're going to do a lot of good things, both in terms of service, fire safety, and unaccounted for water by proactively, were the town to acquire the system, repairing it so that we're not always chasing, we're basically in front of it.
Just a gee whiz statistic I got the other night. There were 31 breaks in the last 12 months. And I know some of those you think they probably were was that in Hingham? 21 of those breaks were in Hull. So their infrastructure is in more serious jeopardy than ours. That's why we came up with a plan that individual towns would pay for their own individual improvements. Mm-hmm. Chief Duff.
Thank you. Mac Duff, Fire Chief. Just on the unaccounted water, I think if you put that in perspective, and it needs to be, that's 200,000 gallons of water lost for every million gallons pumped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Every million gallons that goes into the system, we're losing 200,000 gallons. On a $3 million gallon day, that's 600,000 gallons of water. On a 5 million gallon day, which occurs, I believe, during the summer, that's 1 million gallons of water going out somewhere that no one knows. That's a lot of water, people, in a stressed system. Excuse me. The other thing is the committee, I think the committee should look at possibly in their deliberations whether the system should be publicly run with public employees, and consider that as well as privately run. Weymouth runs it with public employees. I believe Hanover runs it with public employees. We have a very big success rate with the Hingham Municipal Light Department. They're people that work for the community. Case in point, when we have a hurricane go through the town, 4 hours later, almost 100% of the town is back and running. So I'm not saying that privately run water company, if in fact the town votes to buy it, is the way to go. But I would appreciate if the committee would consider doing that among the options. Thank you.
Mark, if I could answer your question, the committee did look at that, and it heard a lot of feedback that we've heard already here about whether the town can run its own water company or not. The vast majority of the 340 communities that have a water system is in public ownership is actually run with public employees. But I think the original recommendation is coming out to go out to an outsourced agency because of the transition capabilities. Not only would we have to hire the employees, we'd have to set up all those structures ahead of time that a private company that already does this, for example, the company we met with, Woodward and Curran, they do this right next door to us. The entire town of Cohasset, except for 325 homes, is run by and water is provided by Woodward and Curran through their water system. So for us, it looks like an easier transition. I think one of the areas where the committee started looking at this is on the town's webpage and in the committee's specific section of it, there is a report from a thesis that was done by a PhD doctoral candidate, and she did get her doctorate for this thesis, so I assume that it met the test of Northeastern's doctorate program. They looked at, or she looked at, private versus public and concluded that the best value for the municipality was the utilization of a private company but municipal ownership, so that you had the efficiency of the private sector, but you remove the profit motive of the private sector, which kind of is counterproductive to the taxpayer. Thank you.
I know I've thrown a lot of numbers out today, but I'm really going to make your eyes glaze over with this one. On the unaccounted for water, as John showed on his chart, it's 253 million gallons of unaccounted for water. That's what the 21% works out to be. Our bills are expressed in terms of CCF, which means, as you probably know, 100 cubic feet. So if you divide the 253 millions of gallons, there's 738 gallons of water, by the way, equals 1 CCF. So our water bill at home is, we get charged for 14 CCFs, which is about 10,000 gallons of water every 3 months. But 738 gallons equals 1 CCF. If you divide the 253 million gallons by 738, that's 342,818 CCFs. There are 3 volume charges on your bill. There's a usage rate per CCF of $2.87 per CCF, a treatment facility volume surcharge of 73.4 cents per CCF. This is all on your bills. And a treatment facility O&M surcharge of $1.01 per CCF. If you multiply all that out by the 342,818 CCFs and unaccounted for water, it adds up to a dollar price of $1,583,202. Think back to the $12 million number that we talked about initially. That's the $12 million that the ratepayers in Hingham are billed. There's another $1.6 million that is sitting out there someplace. I'll just say that, you know, it's perverse, but it almost seems like the more unaccounted for water that goes through the system, the more money Aquarian makes. So.
We're talking about the lost water. Now, years ago, when I was working in town and looking at infrastructure, City of Boston was basically losing about 60% of the water. Your chart showed a DEP goal, but what is the standard for lost water? And the goal is obviously a goal, and I would assume when it's stated as a goal, it's probably a lot higher for all communities. Now, we're not going to come up with 100% accountability, we're going to have lost water. And I'm not sure that Aquarian or Weymouth or Boston would be any better on, with these goals. And, you know, I'm looking for a realistic number of the industry versus a goal. And everybody's goal is far better than what reality is.
It's a good question. There's a DPU filing as of about 2009 that in a footnote cites an industry average that's between 10 and 15%. So DEP's goal is 10, but the industry average is in the zone of 10 to 15. I'd like to make one other clarification, Mark, in terms of your suggestion about consideration of public employees. And I think Bruce said it very well. Having been in the outsourcing business, but in a different arena, information technology, the advantage of outsourcing initially is, just as Bruce said, you'd have a quick transition from folks that are very well versed. The benefit also is that it's under a contract with a specific term, so that at the point of renewal, the town always has the ability to reevaluate, does it want to basically insource or leave things outsourced?
Mr. Watson.
It's working this time. Yeah, it is.
There you go. Good.
I think while we're thinking about lost water from leaky pipes, which goes back into the ground, and questions of a stressed watershed, a corollary is to do as much as possible to recharge with future development. And with the increasing amount of impervious surface in South Hingham, with the hope for development, any gallon that's put back in the ground there, rather than going to a storm drain, is a gallon saved and a gallon usable.
Right.
And it's troubling to see major new parking lots that seem to have almost no provision for recharge on site. Because the aquifer is stressed, but we have some options about it, no matter who owns it, who owns the plant.
Okay, that's a good point. Thank you for that. He was here. Bill Ramsey was here, but from the planning board. But that's an excellent suggestion. All right. Any other questions on any other subject? If you're watered out, yes, ma'am.
This is not a particular question, but I went to the water supply meeting this past week where Aquarian made a presentation similar.
Yeah, it's on. Could you? I can't hear you.
Yes. And I wonder if Aquarian might fill in more on the water lossage. It was in the presentation, it was more comprehensive than just...
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
The loss was more than just pipe leaks. So maybe somebody from Aquarian could speak to that.
Well, Mr. Walsh is here. John, if you'd like to answer that, you could...
Thank you for Chairman Buffo for giving me an opportunity to speak. First, following up, I believe, Ed English's comment, I think it'd be great if we had a forum to discuss some of these issues more comprehensively, because I hear some things that have been brought up here and numbers that have been brought up here that are incorrect. And my concern is that people will start to believe them. In terms of the unaccounted for water, the unaccounted for water target in most states in this country is 15%, and we are higher than that. Massachusetts DEP has a long-term goal, and you had mentioned it, of 10%, it is a goal. The risk of trying to drive down unaccounted for water, the way that you can do it, one of the ways, is to replace a lot of water main. But by chasing that goal and trying to drive down to 10% unaccounted for water, you spend a tremendous amount of money replacing water mains. And that's the type of thing, that's the type of reaction that drives up water rates. So every year, when we do our capital budgeting, and we do it 5 years in advance, 5-year plans, we do take a look at this issue, and we keep in the forefront of our minds what the impact on water rates is going to be. And that is why, since Aquarian bought the water system in 2002, rates have gone up 1.8% a year on average, compared to the statewide average of 5.2% a year. So Aquarion, by keeping, when we do our capital budgeting, we're not trying to chase goals that may not make sense. We're trying to get the unaccounted for water under control and at the same time controlling rates.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that, John. I just one point of clarification, since we're in clarification mode. You said since Aquarion owned the company in 2002. You mean when Kelda owned the company in 2002, McCrary owned the company since 2007. And the 1.8% references the period of time when there were no rate increases between 2002 and 2007. Am I right?
Aquarion, first of all, someone in here said Kelda formed Aquarion back in 2002. I worked for Aquarion in the late 90s, and Aquarion's been around since 1857. It was a different company name, Bridgeport Hydraulic Company. Aquarion also was the company, the folks who bought this system in 2002 were folks like me. I was one of the folks who did due diligence, and I was one of the folks for the first couple of years who ran engineering for this system. So the idea that it's a different company starting in 2006 is not true.
No, I said different owner.
The folks who have always run this system since 2002, it's been the same folks since that time. We chose, when we bought the system in 2002, to not go in for a rate increase for 7 years. The first rate increase was in 2007 under our ownership. And
Under McCrary's ownership.
No, Aquarion is the owner of the system.
And you're owned by?
Macquarie.
And when did Macquarie?
They purchased it in 2006.
That's my point.
There was a change of parent company in 2006. The folks who run the system are the folks like me who've been involved since 2002.
I am not challenging your integrity in any way, shape, or form. I'm just telling the facts are that McCrary, the parent, changed. That was the new parent in 2007. And as you look at the statistics, the unaccounted for water versus McCrary versus Kelda ownership, and you look at the rates, McCrary versus Kelda ownership. That's all I'm looking at. I'm sure the people and the integrity of the people who work in that company is beyond reproach. But you have bosses and we have bosses. You have goals and we have goals.
So the suggestion here is that something Macquarie has done has driven up unaccounted for water. That's my understanding from what you are saying.
I didn't say they drove it up. I just said the management has changed. And I see the statistical results that reflect that change. I leave it up to the public to decide whether there's a causal relationship. That's all.
I can assure you there is no causal relationship between a change in a parent company and unaccounted for water in the system.
I note, I'll let it rest right there. That's your opinion.
Thank you.
I have a different one. Are there any other questions? Okay, it's 10 to 4. It's time to go. Thank you all for coming and appreciate your attention very much.